Thank you, Ron. So I neglected to mention when we started, we're into a 3-person tag team here to talk about the Mendenhall Wetlands Study Group's opinion of the draft document that came out in March and that we commented on in April. So the second person of that crew is Alex Wertheimer, who is also been very active with the study group and was probably the key author in putting together our critique of the scoring system that DOWL used in trying to come up with which alternatives had what kind of impacts. So I'll yield to Alex. And
DOWL stand for?
It's an engineering consulting company, and I have no idea what it stands for.
Where is it located?
Anchorage, with an office here as well. Alex.
Yeah. See if I think Ron left me hanging here with some of the process concerns. I'm going to run through those real briefly and then get into the critique of the ranking of the different. Can you hear me okay? Am I coming through okay? Closer, closer? Better? Okay. There was no reporting on the airport board or air carrier concerns, the lack of consideration of a bench road. Criteria were arbitrarily changed between the level 1 screening and level 2. The DOWL report is full of faulty analysis. The 2023 field studies, as Ron mentioned, were inadequate for environmental impact assessments, missed deadlines and inaccurate timelines, and talked about the off-refuge alternative proposed to be removed without due process and public input. And if this is really concern, why doesn't CBJ voice concern about existing highway infrastructure at Salmon Creek? Okay, to go forward then, the level 1 screening process identified the 6 alternatives that we've seen put up here on the maps. The level 2 screening, DOWL has done a draft scoring and ranking of the alternative crossings. They released that to the technical advisory groups in February of 2024. It is a draft. We can be hopeful that they may respond to technical input and change it, but I'm going to speak to how they evaluated the existing crossing. So they structured criteria to score relative impact, 3 categories: the purpose and needs, additional goals, and environmental screening. They provided a scoring matrix and associated level 2 impact table, and they summed the scores across all the criteria to identify the best alternative. And the outcome of their evaluation is here. I don't know if this, there we go. I don't know if you can see the red dot, but it's there. And so the scores are negative as an artifact of the scoring rubric. I'll talk about that in a minute. The least negative score is in the best alternative. So that's the East Sunny Point one, followed by Twin Lakes and West Sunny Point, with Salmon Creek ranked the lowest. Now it is a draft, but it has been presented publicly. DOWL presented these results to the CBJ Public Works and Facilities Committee, and the Juneau Empire picked up on that and ran a story. Sunny Point route near airport runway gets highest score for second Juneau Douglas crossing. After the release of the scoring matrix, there was a lot of input from the technical advisory group identifying some real problems with how the evaluation was done. One problem was the rating rubric minimizes environmental and ecological impacts. Scoring gradients are -2 to 2 for some criteria, but are 0 to -2 for environmental criteria. So that weights against the environmental impact, and also is not a lot of range for resolution of between the alternatives. The PL team failed to revise criteria or the rating of criteria and respond to feedback to consider broader scale impacts: refuge integrity, ecosystem functions, habitat fragmentation, view sheds, tidal flow, recreational use. Instead, they focused on direct effects of the fill imprint, which can be handled in a criteria or two, and didn't use these other broader scale concerns in their rating system. And some evaluations and scores were simply not credible. So what the Mendenhall Wetlands Study Group did was undertake a process of going through the criteria, identifying incorrectly rated criteria, reevaluating, correcting errors, and considering those broader scale impacts. They had a criteria for costs and both construction and maintenance, but there was no information provided at the time they released their evaluations. Subsequent to that, cost information has been put out there, and we included that. And the rationale and details of this re-ranking are available at heartofjuneau.org. There's also some hard copies in the back. The Mendenhall Wetlands Study Group comments on level 2 screening. And I'm just going to run through a few examples to kind of show you the process we went through. Well, first, getting ahead of myself, a list of the criteria we scored. They weren't all environmental. There was a egregious error in terms of evaluating the decreased congestion on the Douglas Island Bridge and intersection, where they ignored the DOT's own traffic flow studies. We then looked at a number of environmental variables, habitat, land use, but also, there we go, social or recreational impact, and as I said, the costs were integrated in. This is the DOWL rating of the impact on the viewshed. They gave the lowest rating to the Mendenhall Peninsula because of the impact that a bridge would have sweeping across Fritz Cove, and evaluated all the other alternatives as equal impact of about, as you see, -1. In reality, as Ron's photographs show, and this schematic that shows an oblique view of the wetlands looking north towards the airport, and a schematic of a crossing, not all the alternatives would be the same in terms of the impact on the viewshed. Whatever alternative leaves the most intact, largest undisturbed view is going to have the least impact. So our reevaluation drops the Sunny Point ones down to -2, and then decreasing impact as you go south and east from the airport. This one was a real jaw dropper for most of the technical reviews, including the Mendenhall Wetlands Study Group, where East Sunny Point, an area that's well known for bird habitat and birding, is rated no impact, whereas the West Sunny Point is rated -2. Doesn't really make sense. And the reason is that they were doing their assessment entirely on eBird sightings along these abutments where it would tie into Egan. And the actual impact in terms of bird habitat, including migratory birds, is the whole sweep of the structure going right through the middle of some of the best habitat for birds in the wetland. Also point out that the East Sunny Point is actually a longer and therefore more impactful alternative than its the western alternative. Just to show some of that habitat type, as Richard mentioned, the salt marsh is really rare and very important habitat, and both West Sunny Point and East Sunny Point are the areas where we see the most salt marsh habitat, secondarily Vanderbilt. And Kathy Pohl put together eBird's sightings of flocks of waterfowl, mallards, and Canada geese. One thing to remember is these sightings aren't necessarily where the flock is, but where the observer is. But it does show how waterfowl extensively use these areas. So in our re-ranking of this, we dropped East Sunny Point down where it belongs. Also Vanderbilt got more of a negative rating, Twin Lakes somewhat more. And I also note Mendenhall Peninsula got dropped down to -2 because it's adjacent to 3 of the Tier 1 hotspots for birds identified by Bob Armstrong et al. In that 2003 hotspot study. Wetland habitat impacted, another one where it just doesn't make sense that West Sunny Point would have a -2 rating and East Sunny Point -1. Again, this is an artifact of constraining their evaluation to just the abutment tie-in with the roads instead of considering broader scale effects and the effects of the whole crossing structure. So we re-rated those, and East Sunny Point is now, as with West Sunny Point, is a -2 and decreasing impacts as you go south and east. Another mystery one was protected lands directly impacted. Only one, in this case East Sunny Point, was given a -2 rating. Everything else was a 0. And this is an example, I think, of a purposeful avoidance of consideration of the refuge. The reason East Sunny Point got this negative rating is that it could clip across. The orange areas are seal truss mitigation properties. It could clip across that property, which is could be a real nightmare legally, since this is comprehensive compensatory mitigation property that is supposed to be held in conservation status in perpetuity. So there could be some real legal questions about coming across there. So certainly that's a concern with this East Sunny Point, but the whole refuge is protected status. And any consideration of how the different alternatives impact protected lands needs to take into account the refuge. And when we do that, again, we see not just East Sunny Point, but these others rated -2, and then decreasing level of impact as we go south and east. So those are some examples of how we rescored. The details and all the criteria are described in our report. And remember, heartofjuneau.org. So here again are the cumulative scores that DOWL presented. Their drafts, they could change, hopefully will change. When we add up our revised scoring, we see that the Sunny Point alternatives drop down, Salmon Creek up a little bit, some convergence with Twin Lakes, but profound difference in terms of the order of the rankings. Instead of the top 3 being East Sunny Point, Twin Lakes, and West Sunny Point, we now have Twin Lakes, Salmon Creek, and Vanderbilt. And we think this shows what the difference is if you take a comprehensive, holistic view of what the structures, the amount of habitat they impact, and consider broader scale biological and ecological factors and evaluate them. And it makes a good case for these alternatives to go forward into the EIS, doing an evaluation just on direct footprint effects gives you a skewed view of the actual impacts and could result in alternatives that would actually minimize impacts to the refuge being dropped out before we reach the EIS stage. So I think I'll stop there and turn it back over to Matt.